Hello everyone, and welcome to the second instalment of Driven by Debate. This is a new feature put out by the paid media team here at Journey Further, where we will discuss and debate topics of interest in what is quite a fast-paced and ever-changing industry. Today, we're talking about ad copy testing in PPC, specifically about traditional methods of testing, such as A/B testing, how these have changed in recent times with all the new smart products released by Google. As this is a debate, we're going to be exploring different arguments around the question. It's one of the many topics in paid media that don't necessarily have a right answer, so the right approach may be different for every business. My name is Steve, and I'll host the debate today. The insight is going to come from our lovely paid search analysts, who should magically appear on screen as I read their names out. So today we have Hannah. Hi, Hannah. Scott. Patrick and George, finally. So these are the guys that are going to give you a little bit of the insight into the question around ad copy testing, and specifically, is A/B testing dead? So I'm going to pick on one of you to start off with. I'm going to pick on Hannah. Just around this question, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what A/B testing in PPC is? Historically, I guess why it's been quite a common practice in PPC accounts.
Yeah, so I think before the days of smart bidding, it was kind of the best option really for optimizing ad copy. The best option, the only option really, kind of to have your ad groups on rotate evenly and have two different variants testing against each other using some sort of statistical method, I guess, to make sure there was enough data kind of statistically significant, and then just going again with another variation. And I think Google always did have the option of like optimizing to clicks, certainly as far as I can remember, but I don't ever remember it being that good. I think it did get a bit better before kind of smart bidding took off. But yeah, I think before we had like smart bidding and Google kind of, I guess a lot of the machine learning really took off, it was the best option to be able to say, just have two different variations and just to be able to A/B test them. I think there probably was a bit of awareness that not the same message doesn't appeal to the same people, and two people might be searching the same keyword but be looking for different things. But I guess that's just something that at the time we just didn't have the tools to be able to address, and with the tools we had, just going for the message that generally worked best was the best option we had.
Yeah, so it does seem like it was really widely used. Certainly, like when I started doing PPC in 2014, up until maybe more recently, and it's kind of, I think we probably are looking at different approaches to it now, because of some of the things you mentioned about Google being able to do a better job these days than what you used to be able to do. Just want to go maybe to Patrick quickly, because Patrick's a newer member of the team, and obviously you're coming into an industry, Patrick, in the last sort of year or 2 years, where these changes have been in effect, and things have changed from when we started doing it, probably. So, how do you view sort of ad copy testing in PPC, Patrick? Like, just as a sort of like newer person into it.
Yeah, so from my experience, just under a sort of year in paid media, the common practice always seemed to be with ad testing is you'd write a few variations for your ads per ad copy, you'd set them live for 30 days, and you'd calculate statistical significance of it. You'd pause the loser, keep going with the winner, and that would only really sort of work on your manual bidding accounts. But it seems to be now, when a lot more accounts using smart bidding and that sort of thing, it's removed that ability to do these sort of traditional A/B testing. You can use Google sort of ad variations to try and help you do that. But now I think there's more emphasis on using RSAs and ETAs and sort of leverage these RSAs. And you give Google this sort of wealth of ad copy into the account, and it can run it against each other. So it uses smart bidding to show the right message to the right people.
Yeah, that's right, I think. You mentioned two kind of interesting things there, two specific Google products, I think, which have changed the scope of A/B testing from running two variants or whatever. One was responsive search ads, and the other was smart bidding. So does anybody sort of want to talk about the effect that smart bidding has had specifically on ad copy testing, and why maybe it's better, or is it worse, or I don't know. I just want to open it up there to whoever wants to elaborate a little bit on it. Or I can pick one here, either or. We'll go with Scotty.
Yeah, I think as Hannah mentioned, with the advent of smart bidding, it's removed that option to rotate evenly. And just to reiterate both of Hannah and Paddy's points, that now you are trying to show the best possible message to the best possible user, and smart bidding in conjunction with those RSAs is supposed to do that. There's some really interesting theory about what things like the responsive search ads in line with smart bidding can do. So theoretically, you should be able to set completely different headlines by, for example, like a different product, and the smart bidding should be able to detect what someone is searching for and present them with that. Now, you wouldn't go to like extremes of putting things like an RSA that contains things like trainers and cars and expecting it to pick up on like nuances there, but it is an interesting thing to think about, and there's a lot of interesting tests that we can do going forwards.
Yeah. So when I think of tests, I generally think about, I do kind of instinctively think of it as like an A/B thing. So like where you would pick winners and things like that. And I guess like historically, we've always looked at metrics like click-through rate and stuff like that. So in sort of a new method of testing where you've got smart bidding there, you mentioned, potentially showing different headlines, different copy to different people based on who they are and the signals that are given out to Google. What do you look for in a test these days, George? Like what would you potentially put into play, and what would you try and achieve from running it?
Yeah, I think the important thing is obviously we look for an increase in click-through rate first and foremost, but it doesn't really tell the whole story. So, if I wanted to increase the click-through rate on one of my ads, I'd put a lower price on it. But if they go to the website and that price isn't reflected on the website, then that's a bad user experience. So you can expect, a drop in conversion rate. So I think primarily you're looking for, both of those metrics to improve ideally. If that's not doable, then, conversion rate staying the same whilst you're getting an improvement on your click-through rate on the results page is probably, I would say, the main marker of a success for an A/B test.
Yeah. So, I mean, with things changing, so what would you do? Would you put in like would you use expanded text ads still? Would you mostly rely on responsive search ads? Does it change the way that you maybe write copy or the way that you approach it in general?
Yeah, I think the way we approach testing has been changed mostly by the ads themselves. So I think like A/B testing was sort of born out of a necessity. So, sort of like 8 years ago when I started, the character counts were so limited compared to what they are now. You could only have, 2 headlines and 1 description. So if you're a business who, you consider yourself to have 3 USPs, then you would need to write 3 separate ads in most cases. Nowadays, that's not the case. So yeah, it is a lot more streamlined in terms of having, RSAs where you can, you put all your unique selling points in one ad, and it will sort of float the best performing ones to the top. And the sort of approach that I take is, so I use those RSAs as like a test embed, and then anything that does perform particularly well, roll those out into its own unique expanded text ad. So I think that's the sort of approach that Google has sort of been recommending ever since RSAs came about, and it seems to have worked pretty well so far in my experience.
So it's like an RSA is a method to cast open the net quite wide, and then obviously you can take learnings from it. Do you not think though that RSAs are pretty limited in terms of like reporting? I mean, like, does anybody find that the insight that you get from them is sometimes a little bit? So I know they'll show you maybe like what impressions or whatever you can get. You can look at the performance metrics of the ad as a whole. But, if you put in a lot of data, a lot of maybe 15 different headlines and 4 different descriptions or whatever, how do you utilize that data? Like what can you actually read from it? Because is it not limited in ways of what Google actually gives you access to? Let's go with whoever wants to answer that.
I'll go for that one. I think because I think that's a really important point, and I think it comes back to the question of which metrics we're looking at, because I think nowadays it is harder for us if we are using this method of just giving Google as much information as possible, as many different ad copies as possible, and letting Google optimize the right message to the right person. In theory, it's brilliant because we're showing the right message to the right person, but I think we have lost the ability to really understand what message is working, and especially with, I guess, the limited reporting on RSAs especially. It's hard to be able to report back to a client and say, okay, this USP free delivery generally appeals to more people than you 10% off for new customers, and that's the message that you should really be pushing on your website and things like that. And I think the metrics is a hard one, because I know I've definitely been guilty of looking at kind of things like impressions, just because you kind of think, well, the ones that get shown the most are probably performing the best, and I think to some extent that's true, but then actually you might have one message that appeals to a small set of audience really well, and if you're looking at things like volume, you could end up kind of cutting off an ad that is doing really, really well to a small selection of people that you might not have good enough data in terms of click-through rate and conversion rate to be able to make a judgment on that. So I think that's something that has been lost a little bit, and I think is probably a bit unknown for a lot of people, is how do you still report on what's working and what isn't.
So it's like the complexity and all the different stuff you can put into a test, all the different things, is great, but it's not like as easily read. You're saying that you obviously don't get sort of defined results like you used to do with A/B testing. Because, if you're putting in 15 different headlines, maybe one that doesn't show much is actually really relevant for 5% of your customer base or whatever. But I thought it was an interesting point about us losing functionality maybe as things get more and more advanced, because it's quite a contradictory sort of statement. I don't know if anybody agrees with it or disagrees with it.
I've been running some app install ads recently, which are like, it's sort of like an RSA where you throw loads of different assets at it, but it's to like the nth degree because you're supplying it with video assets and image assets. But in that case, you actually get like the click-through rate of each individual asset when it's used in the ad. So I think that's always been the case for those campaign types. And I think RSAs, basically, they've introduced RSAs before they've fully thought out how they should report on them. So hopefully, like, the reporting on RSAs goes the same way, especially now that Google are saying that RSAs are the default sort of ad format going forward. So I think eventually we'll see a bit more data down the line. But like Hannah said, at the minute we don't get a whole lot. It's just that impressions level, which like Hannah said, you assume that means it's a good performing headline, but there's no way of knowing really.
I want to sort of pull it back to the title of this this debate, which is about A/B testing and it being dead. I think, Patrick, you mentioned that you still potentially have used it, or in our accounts at Journey Further, there's still a place for it. So if we're saying about all this new technology and stuff like that, why would we potentially have two variants of ETAs and look at the metrics there? What's the use in it? If we're saying that a better approach maybe is smart bidding RSAs, giving it more assets, sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's still a definitely sort of scope for ETAs and these A/B testings and getting quite specific, especially when you're testing specific hypotheses. I think that can be serviced really well with A/B testing. If you want to test a really sort of niche messaging or a call to action or an offer, that can be really useful. I mean, A/B testing is never going to sort of set the world alight. It's not going to make huge strides in your performance. It's likely to be sort of marginal, maybe increases at best. But I think those marginal increases can really help you sort of your account in general. And you can even use the winners of this, put it into other different marketing channels, onto your websites, onto your emails, once you know which specific thing works really well.
Yeah. So maybe it's not completely dead then, because you know, given some pretty good points there about things that it could still be used for. Does anybody not do it anymore in favour? Like Scott, do you know, if you were running an account, what would be kind of like your standard things to run and test? Because I think, you know, just looking at click-through rate of headlines and stuff like that isn't, well, it is obviously quite useful, like the old ways of looking at stuff, but it seems like our scope has increased to look at a lot of different things. So, you know, what are other things maybe that you could get insight from running ad copy tests, and what tests are important to run?
There are ways that you still could run a direct A/B test. So you can use things like add variations or experiments within the interface to get those up and running, if that's something you want to do. I think that the difficulty that we're finding is that it's just not as straightforward or as easy to do, and we do have that knowledge that you want to show specific creative for specific users. There's lots of other interesting things to test though. So a recent test I've done, we were seeing that responsive search ads weren't generating as good click-through rates as ETAs. So we used drafts and experiments to test whether ETAs in isolation work better than the combinations of ETAs and RSAs, whether RSAs in isolation work better, or whether the two work better than each other, and found that when used in combination with each other, because they can appear to different users in different auctions on different devices, we were seeing much better results from using both ETAs and RSAs. And there's all sorts of things like that you can test. It just depends entirely on the account that you're looking at, and what you want it to get out, I suppose. Yeah.
So when you look at stuff like that, what exactly, you know, you say like you're getting better performance and things like that. Does it just mean that, you know, you're seeing a better overall return? Like, how would you look at a test to define whether or not it's worked or not? Because it seems like click-through rate on its own or whatever can be kind of a little bit of a rubbish metric sometimes, because it doesn't tell you a full picture. It just tells you that more people have clicked advert. Another thing.
Yeah, I think that's where the real value of using ETA up with these tests and looking at all those metrics in combination. Are we seeing more impressions? Are we appearing in more auctions? Are we driving more traffic to site? And is that traffic still converting and providing a return? Obviously, the end goal is that return, but you've got to look at all these metrics in combination to figure that out.
I just want to go back to, you know, the potential that things have changed. I mean, do we all agree maybe that things have changed for the better to get better performance out of PPC accounts? If stuff has changed for the worse, what is it exactly that, you know, that limits us? Would you say, Hannah?
I definitely think it's changed for the better. I definitely think this kind of the ability for Google to show the right message to the right person is better than us kind of our traditional A/B testing, and trying to do like a catch-all, I guess. So I think I guess primarily my kind of approach to ad copy would always kind of first and foremost be to just have as much different messaging in there as possible. And I think that's quite an important point, because I think that's something I wouldn't have done historically. I would have maybe not played it safe, but I think there's certain messages that you kind of know are going to work well in PPC, like free delivery or a percentage off or something like that. And maybe more descriptive, like more emotive ad copy, maybe didn't get used as often. But I think now I would feel more confident putting some variations in that do kind of look at different styles of ad copy that might appeal to different types of people, that I think with the traditional A/B method I would have never done. And I think, you know, I mentioned earlier kind of we lost that ability to be able to say, okay, this USP works better than this USP. And I think if you are just relying on feeding Google as much information as possible, as many different types of messaging as possible using RSAs, I do think you've lost that. But as Scott mentioned, there is still some methods, although they're somewhat restrictive, there is still things like add variations and drafts and experiments. If we wanted to run an A/B test, we can. So I would still use A/B testing, but it certainly isn't like the primary optimization for ad copy. I don't think.
How good is it, the the tech that we're talking about, specifically, I suppose we're talking about smart bidding, RSAs, and the ability to improve your overall performance by showing the right message to the right people at the right time, for example. How well does it do it? Is it good enough that we can be quite bold and have like loads and loads of different messages that, clients might not be comfortable with, but, is it there yet, basically?
I suppose we're never going to know definitely, are we, exactly how the algorithms work and whether they're doing the right thing. But I think Scott mentioned earlier that we have tested using drafts and experiments having just ETAs and then having ETAs plus RSAs and RSAs on their own. And generally the best option was to have the combination of ETAs and RSAs. So I think that does suggest that it's working. I think we know it's working. I think the difficulty is we don't necessarily know how it's working or what it's doing, but do we need to know that? Like if it's getting good results, do we necessarily need to know exactly how these algorithms are doing that?
Yeah.
I would say that it doesn't necessarily always work across the board, and it's still on a client by client basis. I do agree, Hannah, that for the most part we are seeing successful results, but there are those ones that stand out still that it might not work. Sometimes if you've got such a powerful USP, that's the thing that will always beat out having an individual message for an individual user. It comes down to testing and just seeing what works for any given client on any given day.
Yeah. I think in terms of the ad formats, then they've seen a massive improvement. So like I've gone from when I first started this job, sort of struggling to fit everything I wanted to say into an ad. And now we're at the point where we can apply 15 headlines to an RSA. And it just means, like Hannah said, you can try, I don't think many businesses have 15 unique selling points. So you have to come up with like some more creative things, like sort of left field type headlines, which I think is good to do every now and then. And, if it is a headline that will work, it will show. If it doesn't, then it's not going to expose half your traffic to and show a headline that's not going to work. So I think in terms of, the ad formats being paired with smart bidding, I think it's been working well for the last couple of years for me.
It's interesting, right? Because PPC in general and just like how people use Google has changed so much like in the last 10 years. Like PPC used to be in a yellow box at the top of a search thing, and then we had like 4 ads and a load down the side, and they removed all that, and now you get a lot of like knowledge-based answers serving organically or Google Maps or whatever. Depends like what you're on your phone and stuff like that too. So do you think that those changes fundamentally with what Google have done to their results pages have meant that we've got to sort of adapt and try different things and newer ways of managing it? Yeah. Is it just old hat, the A/B stuff?
I think like the RSAs and, just having ad rotation that's optimized towards clicks will account for things like knowledge graphs. Like back when I started, you knew exactly how your ad was going to appear. You gave it 2 headlines and 1 description, and it would show those 2 headlines and 1 description every single time. Now, if you, with an ETA, sometimes it, you don't know how it's going to appear. It could be, truncated, for example. And then, with all the things like knowledge graphs, you don't know how it's going to appear. So I think A/B tests, they're a bit more, if you ran one now, I don't think it'd be as accurate as if you ran one 8 years ago, for example. You would hope all the things like RSAs and smart bidding would account for that. But yeah, it's Google's sort of black box, isn't it? So you just sort of assume the best, really.
Google's black box like keeps coming up. They're sort of taking data away from us or whatever. How does it affect things? Because do you remember average position was a metric that we probably had a year or 2 years ago? I can't remember when it was removed. But what difference does it make when they remove this stuff? Because and what's the reason for it? I suppose because average positions usually was quite a powerful way of looking at ad copy testing. Do you think they're removing it because it was never really that accurate, or people were just drawing the wrong conclusions maybe?
I think it sort of changed when all the knowledge graph stuff started become becoming more common. So average position was just of all the paid for ads on the page, what position does yours appear in? So you could have two different searches, both with a position of 1, but if there's a knowledge graph on top of the first ad, then it's a whole lot further down the page. So I don't think it was such a true representation of where your ad was appearing once all the things like knowledge graphs came into play, which are now basically on most searches that you perform nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think before we finish, what I might do is do a bit of a round robin, put you on the spot, and ask you the question of the event, which is, is A/B testing dead? Yes or no? And then if you can sum up your thoughts in terms of, what's the most important thing that somebody running a PPC account can go and do now regarding ad copy testing. So let's hit Patrick first.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that A/B testing is dead in its final form. I think there is a time and a place for it, but I think you have to start using these new things, especially RSA and smart bidding, to more of your advantage. And I think our role now will become more creative. And like you said, this main point of getting the right message in front of the right people. And if you can give Google as much information and ad copy as you can, it's going to be able to show that right message to the right demographic, especially if one search query is showing for two completely different people. You always need to have two different sort of ads that are more relevant to them. So I think, no, it's not dead, but there is a time and place for it to be more specific, but you have to sort of start using this RSAs and smart bidding more.
Okay, so thanks for that. We'll go to Scott. Scott, what's your thoughts, your final thoughts?
I agree with Patrick. I was considering just saying something really controversial, like just going, yeah, it's dead and buried, be done with it. But
yeah.
No, I agree that I think there's a time and place for it. I think in terms of like key actions going forward, it depends entirely on the level that you're working at. There's a lot of accounts that we see nowadays that are still just running ETAs and don't even have any RSAs in place. It'd be worthwhile just getting those built out. If you do have an established account with lots going on in it, start looking at those new cross-campaign asset reports and seeing which assets are driving the most impressions. Keep an eye on those, see when Google develops those more, and then starting thinking about more of those creative tests, like making use of pinning within RSAs and making sure that certain assets show in different places within the ad. There's lots of different things for different people at different levels to be testing and trialing going forward.
Very interesting. George?
I think this is one of those rare occasions where our goal is sort of well aligned with Google's goal. So they want more clicks on their ads that we run because it nets them more money. So I think all the changes they've made to things like RSAs have been with the goal of increasing clicks on ads. So I'm of the opinion that we sort of fully embrace them. Obviously, I think A/B testing, the way we have done it, 5-8 years ago, can't really do it the same way anymore. I think it's just a case of embracing the new ad formats and just keeping ad copy cycling. So, taking out worst performing headlines every so often and replacing them with something new, something a bit more creative, maybe. I think that's the sort of right approach going forward.
Cool, thanks. Before I ask Hannah to close, what we're going to do after Hannah's made her points is go and ask some questions. So if anybody would like to ask some questions, you can post on the thread in LinkedIn, I think. And they'll come up and obviously I'll put it to the guys. So yeah, Hannah, if you'd just like to close it off with your thoughts on A/B testing and what's important for people going forward, that would be great.
Yeah, so I certainly don't think A/B testing is as important for PPC as it once was. And I think there's the guys have just gone through so many other kind of methods of optimizing and different kind of tactics that we can use within ad copy nowadays. And I think from optimizing from a PPC perspective, those methods are so much stronger than A/B testing. I don't think A/B testing is dead, certainly not yet, because I do think there is that value every now and again. I don't think it's something you'd always be having an A/B test running. I certainly wouldn't on my accounts. But I think occasionally there is benefit into knowing, does this USP work better than this USP? I think that benefit largely lives outside of PPC for a lot of clients anyway. But yeah, I don't think it's dead yet, but I don't think it is a primary form of kind of optimizing PPC anymore.
Cool. And what's like one thing that somebody should go and do, in their account tomorrow to get a better approach to our copy testing?
Just have lots of different ads. Have at least 3 different ETAs running. Have your RSA set up. Just have lots of different messaging. As long as that's relevant, as Scott said, there is the odd example where you have to be careful with your wording, and it's not always relevant. But for the vast majority of clients, I'd say just have lots and lots of different messaging, different types of messaging that might appeal to different types of people. That would be my kind of number 1 top tip.
And let the smart bidding take control, because I think obviously we're all pretty agreed. We're all pretty agreed that smart bidding's a good thing, and it definitely seems to work well. So yeah. Cool. Thanks very much for your thoughts, guys. I thought that was really interesting. What we'll do now is, if anybody has got comments, I believe they should pop up on my screen. So if we get any, I'll pose them to you. But yeah, let's see if any come through, I suppose. Hopefully, if one of the paid media team will be watching this and is able to ask a question if nobody else is.
What was the final score then on is it dead or is it not dead? I think 2-2.
I thought you were all agreed, really, that it's not dead. Not dead.
Do you want to be the tiebreaker then?
Not dead, is it?
Do I want to be the tiebreaker?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. I would say it's definitely not dead. I agree fully, really, with what Hannah said about how it's not as important, and the other forms of testing, like some of the stuff that Scott talked about, like running different variations, running a different mix of RSAs and ETAs and stuff like that is still important. But I know that there's a lot of clients out there that still get some good benefit from testing specific things. So no, it's not dead. It's just not the be all and end all. Cool. We still don't have any questions, which means that the level of engagement on this from the paid media team has fallen short of where I would have hoped. But yeah, we'll give it another. Let's give it another 30 seconds. I don't know if any of you have got anything else to add or. Cool. Let's call it a day. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully it was useful. We'll run another one of these in a couple of weeks with hopefully some new faces from the paid media team. We will catch you next time. Thank you very much. Bye.